The gym didn't look like a place where history would be made. It smelled of rubber mats and iron plates, of old sweat that had settled into canvas and never quite left. The fluorescent lights above flickered faintly, humming with a tired electric buzz that blended into the low murmur of voices scattered around the room. A wrestling mat covered most of the floor, its surface scuffed and worn from years of bodies colliding against it. Chalk dust floated lazily in the air near the squat rack in the corner. Metal folding chairs had been pulled into a loose semicircle around the mat. Some men leaned against the walls with arms crossed. Others sat forward, elbows on knees, waiting for something they couldn't quite define. It was supposed to be a simple demonstration. Word had spread that Bruce Lee would be visiting the gym that evening. A small group of martial artists had invited him to show a few movements, nothing formal, just footwork, timing, concepts. Some came out of curiosity, some came to learn, and some came to test. Bruce stood near the center of the mat now, dressed simply. Black training pants, a plain fitted shirt. No dramatic stance, no theatrical gestures. He had just finished explaining the importance of distance, how a fight was less about force and more about space. How controlling the line between two bodies determined everything that followed. A few nodded thoughtfully. Others looked unconvinced. Near the back of the room, a chair scraped loudly against the concrete floor. The sound cut through the space like a blade. Heads turned. He stood slowly, unfolding himself from the chair as if the room weren't quite large enough to contain him. The man was enormous, thick through the shoulders, barrel-chested. Arms like coiled cables beneath his sleeveless athletic shirt. His neck seemed almost as wide as his jaw, and his ears bore the unmistakable ridges of years spent grinding against mats, cauliflowered and hardened. 280 pounds, someone whispered. Former collegiate heavyweight, undefeated in regional circuits, known for lifting grown men off their feet and driving them into canvas hard enough to rattle teeth. He rolled his shoulders once, as though loosening them out of habit. Then he laughed. It wasn't a polite laugh. It was loud, open, confident. "You serious?" he said, stepping forward onto the edge of the mat. "That's what you call fighting?" The murmur in the room shifted. A few people exchanged glances. Others leaned back slightly, sensing a change in the air. Bruce didn't respond. The wrestler continued, his voice steady but edged with amusement. You talk about distance like it's magic." He gestured vaguely with one thick hand. "Out there on a mat, there's no distance. I grab you, you're down. Simple." A couple of nervous chuckles rose from the side of the room. The wrestler stepped closer. The mat compressed slightly beneath his weight. "I've pinned guys twice your size," he said. "Men who actually lift. Men who fight for scholarships. You?" His eyes traveled up and down Bruce's frame, measuring, judging. "You're too small to fight me." The words hung in the air. Not shouted, not aggressive, just certain. A few heads turned toward Bruce, waiting for a reaction, waiting for irritation, for ego, for pride to flare. But Bruce Lee simply stood there. His hands rested loosely at his sides, his posture natural, balanced, not squared off, not defensive, just present. If the insult registered, it didn't show. The wrestler smirked, misreading the silence. Don't get me wrong," he continued. "You look fast, real fast. Probably great in the movies." A few more laughs, louder this time. "But this isn't dancing. This isn't choreography. This is pressure." He stomped one heavy foot onto the mat for emphasis. The sound echoed. "When someone my size decides to take you down," he said, taking another step forward, "there's no philosophy that stops that." The room grew quieter. Bruce slowly lifted his gaze. On meeting the wrestler's eyes fully now, there was no anger in his expression, no embarrassment, no visible challenge, only focus. The wrestler's grin widened slightly, mistaking stillness for hesitation. "What's wrong?" he said. "Never had to deal with real weight before?" The circle of spectators subtly widened. Chairs were nudged back with quiet scraping sounds. One man near the wall folded his arms tighter, eyes narrowing with interest. Another shifted toward the exit, uncertain how far this would go. Bruce inhaled slowly, exhaled. Still nothing. That silence began to change shape. At first it felt passive, almost uncomfortable, but as seconds stretched, it transformed into something else. Deliberate, controlled. The wrestler's smile faltered, not fully, just slightly, a micro-adjustment in confidence. He had expected defensiveness, a verbal response, an attempt to justify. Instead, he was being observed, studied, measured. Bruce tilted his head a fraction, as though examining a detail only he could see. "You laugh," Bruce said finally, his voice calm and even, "because you believe size decides the outcome." The wrestler shrugged, unapologetic. "Size helps." "Sometimes," Bruce replied softly. The answer wasn't argumentative. It wasn't confrontational. It was simply stated. The wrestler stepped fully onto the mat now, close enough that the difference in their frames became undeniable. He towered over Bruce. His shadow fell across him. Up close, the contrast was dramatic. 280 pounds of mass, power built through years of grinding discipline and brutal repetition, thick legs designed to drive through resistance, arms trained to lock, crush, and control. And in front of him, a man nearly half his weight, lean, compact, relaxed. "You want to show them something real?" the wrestler asked, voice lowering slightly. "Oh, show them what happens when someone your size meets someone mine." A hush settled over the gym. No one spoke now. Even the fluorescent hum seemed to fade. Bruce's eyes did not leave the wrestler's face. His breathing remained steady. Around them, the circle widened instinctively. Shoes squeaked softly against the floor as spectators created space. A chair tipped slightly and was caught before it fell. The wrestler rolled his neck once, then twice. He bounced lightly on the balls of his feet, testing the mat beneath him. "You're too small to fight me," he repeated, this time not laughing, just stating what he believed to be fact. Bruce didn't shift into a stance, didn't raise his fists, didn't lower his center dramatically. He simply stood there, balanced, waiting. And in that waiting, something subtle changed in the room. The laughter had stopped. The amusement had faded. What remained was anticipation. Not of violence, but of revelation. The wrestler took one final step forward, closing the distance until only a few inches separated them. The air between them felt charged. "Come on," he said quietly. "Let's see what you've got." Bruce's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. And somewhere in that stillness, unseen, unfelt, by most in the room, the fight had already begun. For a moment, neither man moved. The gym felt smaller now, the circle tighter. While 30 pairs of eyes fixed on the space between them as if that empty air were the real battleground. The wrestler cracked his neck once more and let out a slow breath through his nose. "Well," he said, "you going to talk about distance again? Or are you going to show them something useful?" His voice wasn't mocking anymore. It carried a challenge. Bruce's gaze remained steady. "Distance," he said quietly, "is useful." A faint ripple of tension passed through the crowd. Some shifted their weight. Someone swallowed audibly. The wrestler smirked. "There's no distance when I'm on top of you." He took another half step forward, closing what little space remained. Bruce did not step back. Instead, he asked softly, "Would you like to test that?" The words weren't loud, but they cut through the room like a blade. Silence followed. Not the awkward silence from before. This one felt intentional, chosen. The wrestler studied Bruce's face, searching for sarcasm, for ego, for a crack in composure. He found none. "You're serious," he muttered. "I am," Bruce replied. A chair scraped backward as someone moved it further from the mat. Another spectator tugged his friend's sleeve and whispered, "This is going too far." But no one intervened. No referee stepped forward. No rules were announced. No time limit agreed upon. Just space, raw and open, The wrestler rolled his shoulders and dropped slightly into a stance more familiar to him. Not boxing, not striking. Wrestling, knees bent, weight forward, hands ready to shoot. Bruce still stood upright, relaxed. That difference irritated the wrestler more than any insult could have. "Don't blink," he muttered to the crowd. Then he moved. The shift was sudden. For a man his size, he was shockingly fast. His level dropped, hips driving forward. Arms shooting out for a double-leg takedown, the kind drilled thousands of times on mats across the country. Efficient, brutal, direct. His shoulder aimed for Bruce's midsection. To most eyes, it looked unstoppable. But Bruce didn't retreat. He angled. It was subtle, a fractional pivot of his lead foot, a slight turn of the hips, enough that the wrestler's forward line no longer found a center. The massive body surged past where Bruce had been a heartbeat earlier. At the same time, Bruce's right hand redirected the wrestler's head, not pushing hard, just guiding, while his left hand brushed against the attacking arm, altering its path. The wrestler stumbled half a step forward before catching himself. Gasps rippled through the room. He hadn't fallen, but he hadn't connected either. He reset instantly, too experienced to panic over one miss. His face tightened, though. The grin was gone. "Lucky angle," he muttered. Bruce said nothing. And he had already adjusted his position again, just outside the wrestler's direct line. The wrestler circled now, slower, measuring, testing. Then he shot again. This time he feinted high first, a quick reach upward as if to grab the shoulders, before dropping low for the legs. It was a classic setup designed to force reaction. Bruce reacted, but not the way expected. Instead of defending the legs directly, he stepped diagonally inside the line of attack, his forearm intercepting the wrestler's reaching arm before full extension. His other hand settled briefly on the back of the wrestler's neck, guiding the momentum downward. The giant's weight carried forward, but instead of lifting Bruce, he found himself redirected. His balance wavered, not dramatically, but noticeably. A murmur rose from the spectators. What they were seeing didn't register as flashy. There were no spinning kicks, no dramatic counters, just efficiency. The wrestler pulled back, irritation creeping in. "You going to fight?" he snapped. "Or just dance around?" Bruce's expression remained neutral, observational. The wrestler exhaled sharply and clapped his hands once, loud against the silence. "Fine." This time he didn't shoot. He advanced deliberately, arms wide, trying to close space and trap Bruce against the edge of the circle. Step by step, he pressured forward, cutting angles the way he would in a tournament. Our Bruce retreated, but not backward in panic. He glided sideways, adjusting subtly, never letting his heels cross, never letting his posture collapse. The wrestler lunged suddenly, reaching for an underhook, aiming to secure body control. Bruce's hand appeared at the exact moment the grip attempted to close. Not a block, an interception. His fingers caught the wrestler's wrist just as the hand tightened. The timing was precise, right at full extension. When strength momentarily gives way to structure, the wrestler felt it instantly. His arm stopped, not because of overpowering force, because of alignment. Bruce rotated slightly, guiding the trapped wrist downward while stepping off the line again. The movement twisted the wrestler's shoulder just enough to disrupt his base. For half a second, the 280-pound frame was no longer stable. That half second felt like a revelation. The crowd went quiet again. Not confused this time, watching. The wrestler jerked his arm free with a grunt, stepping back to regain posture. His breathing had changed, still controlled, but deeper now. He wasn't laughing anymore. "Stand still," he growled. Bruce didn't respond. He didn't need to. The wrestler's frustration grew with each exchange. His identity, built on dominance, on control, was being subtly challenged, not destroyed, just exposed. And exposure can feel worse than defeat. He charged again, this time abandoning setup, his arms wrapped wide, aiming to crush, to close the distance entirely and end the subtle exchanges with raw weight. Bruce didn't brace. He didn't stiffen. He stepped in, not away. inside the arc of the wrestler's reach. His forearm slid under one arm while his other hand redirected the shoulder. His hip rotated slightly against the wrestler's forward drive, not to throw yet, but to disrupt alignment. The effect was immediate. The wrestler's center of gravity shifted forward unexpectedly. His foot slid an inch on the mat, not enough to fall, enough to feel it. The realization flickered across his face. He was not controlling this. He was being managed. The crowd sensed it too. What had begun as amusement was now something else entirely. The wrestler stepped back again, chest rising and falling heavier now. He studied Bruce carefully, and for the first time, a doubt crept into his posture, just a fraction, but visible. Bruce remained relaxed, hands low, eyes steady. He had not attacked, had not struck, had not attempted to dominate. He had only read, adjusted, redirected. The wrestler wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "This isn't over," he muttered. Bruce nodded slightly. "I know." The circle tightened once more. The atmosphere shifted from challenge to confrontation. And beneath the fluorescent lights, as chalk dust hung suspended in still air, the giant prepared to stop testing and start trying to crush. The room braced. The real collision was coming. The shift happened quietly, not in the wrestler's stance, not in his breathing, in his eyes. The testing was over. The measuring, the cautious probing, the small technical exchanges. Gone. What replaced it was something heavier. Pride. Oh, he rolled his shoulders once more, but this time there was no looseness in the motion. His jaw tightened. His fingers flexed open and closed as if preparing to grab something that needed to be broken. "You think you're controlling me," he said, voice lower now. Not loud, not for the crowd, for Bruce. Bruce didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence itself was an answer. The wrestler exhaled sharply and stepped forward with full intent. No feints, no setups, no calculated entries, just mass and commitment. He surged forward, arms wide, aiming to envelop Bruce's torso and drive through him with pure forward pressure. It was the kind of force that had flattened opponents against mats for years, the kind that made technique irrelevant when bones met canvas. To the untrained eye, it looked decisive, unstoppable. The mat trembled faintly beneath his weight as he lunged. 1 second. Bruce shifted his lead foot half a step off the center line, not backward, not sideways in retreat, just enough to change the angle of contact. His torso rotated slightly, hips turning like a door on silent hinges. 2 seconds. The wrestler's arms wrapped forward, expecting resistance, expecting something to push against. They found nothing solid. Bruce's left hand intercepted the near wrist at the moment it extended. His right forearm slid along the wrestler's elbow, guiding rather than blocking. 3 seconds. Momentum continued to carry the 280-pound frame forward, but forward no longer meant into Bruce. It meant past him. Bruce stepped deeper into the angle, positioning himself just outside the wrestler's direct line of power. His hips aligned beneath the larger man's center of gravity, not to lift with strength, but to interrupt balance. 4 seconds. The wrestler felt it, that sudden sickening shift. His weight, at once driving forward confidently, now felt strangely disconnected from the floor. His lead foot tried to adjust, but the angle was wrong. His upper body was committed. His lower body lagged half a fraction behind. Bruce rotated, not explosively, not dramatically, efficiently. The trapped wrist tightened just enough to prevent correction. The guided elbow became a lever. His hip turned as his rear foot anchored lightly against the mat. 5 seconds. The giant's base vanished. To those watching, it happened almost too fast to process. One moment the wrestler was charging. The next, his feet were no longer beneath him. His body lifted, not high, not theatrically, but enough. Enough to break gravity's agreement with him. He tilted, air replaced balance, and then impact. The sound was heavy, a deep, resonant thud as 280 pounds struck canvas flat across the back and shoulder. The mat absorbed most of it. But the echo traveled through the room. Then nothing. No cheering, no shouting, just silence. Complete and absolute. The fluorescent hum returned, louder now in the absence of voices. The wrestler lay staring at the ceiling, chest heaving, not unconscious, not injured, but stunned. Not by pain, by disruption. He blinked once, twice, as if the room might reset itself and correct what had just happened. Bruce stood a few feet away, posture unchanged. Our breathing steady, hands relaxed at his sides. He hadn't thrown a punch, hadn't kicked, hadn't used visible force. The wrestler pushed one palm against the mat, testing his equilibrium. His body responded, but slower than usual. His internal compass had shifted. The sense of control, the one he relied on every time he stepped into competition, was gone. He looked up at Bruce. "You didn't—" He swallowed. "You didn't even hit me." Bruce's voice was calm. I didn't need to." A faint murmur rippled through the spectators. Someone exhaled sharply, as if they had been holding their breath for the entire exchange. The wrestler rolled to one side and sat up slowly. His massive frame, so dominant moments ago, now seemed uncertain. He flexed his fingers, testing sensation. Everything worked, but something deeper had cracked. He replayed it in his mind. The charge, the contact, the shift. There had been no brute strength overpowering him, no visible explosion of force, just alignment, timing, precision. He looked down at his own hands, as if they might explain what had gone wrong. Bruce took a single step closer, not threatening, not triumphant, measured. "You committed fully," Bruce said quietly, "before you understood where you were going." The wrestler's brow tightened. "I had you." "For a moment," Bruce replied. The words weren't arrogant. They were factual. The giant planted both palms on the mat and rose to his knees, then to his feet. The movement was slower than before, not from injury, but from caution. The room remained silent. The laughter from earlier felt like it had happened hours ago. Now there was only attention, focused and sharp. The wrestler stood upright again, towering over Bruce once more. But the height felt different now, less certain. "You got lucky," he muttered automatically, though the conviction behind it was thin. Bruce tilted his head slightly. "Try again." There was no challenge in the tone, no goading, just invitation. The wrestler hesitated, only for a fraction, but everyone saw it. He glanced at the mat beneath him, then back at Bruce. His breathing had steadied, but something else had shifted. Earlier, he had seen Bruce as smaller. Now he saw him as harder to grasp. He stepped forward once more, but this time slower. More aware. And in that awareness, something had changed. The fight was no longer about proving size. It was about understanding what had just happened in 5 seconds that dismantled years of certainty. The wrestler exhaled long and low. "No," he said finally. The single word carried more weight than any insult earlier. He looked around at the circle of onlookers, then back at Bruce. "You didn't overpower me." "No, you moved me." Bruce nodded once. The giant ran a hand across the back of his neck, where sweat had begun to form. "Do it again," he said quietly. Not a demand, a request, but Bruce did not move. "Understanding begins after impact," he replied, "not during." The wrestler held his gaze. For the first time since standing from his chair at the back of the room, there was no laughter in his expression, no ridicule, only recognition. And in that silent gym, beneath flickering fluorescent lights, what had begun as mockery had transformed into something far more dangerous to pride, respect. 5 seconds. That was all it had taken. 5 seconds to turn certainty into silence. No one moved. The giant stood there, chest rising slowly, eyes no longer burning with challenge, but searching. "How?" he asked. It wasn't loud. It wasn't defensive. It was honest. Bruce studied him for a moment before answering. "You relied on size," he said calmly. Size is an advantage, but when you depend on an advantage, it becomes predictable." The wrestler frowned slightly. "I've trained for years." "I can see that," Bruce replied. "Your strength is real. Your balance is strong. Your entry is fast for your weight. But you commit before you confirm." The words landed carefully. "You decided I would resist with force," Bruce continued. "So you prepared to overpower resistance."
But I didn't give you resistance." The wrestler replayed the moment in his mind again, the lunge, the angle, the shift beneath him. "You stepped inside," he said quietly. "Yes." "Why?" "Because you expected me to move away." The giant exhaled slowly. The crowd remained silent, listening. "When you train to dominate," Bruce went on, "you look for something to crush. But when you train to understand, you look for what is missing." He gestured lightly toward the mat. "Oh, you had power. You had momentum. But your balance was forward. Your structure depended on forward pressure. Once that line was broken, the rest collapsed." The wrestler nodded almost unconsciously. "For years," he said, "I've been the strongest man in the room." Bruce's expression softened slightly. "And tonight?" The giant glanced down at the mat again. "Tonight I was heavy." A faint ripple of understanding passed through the room. Bruce gave a small nod. "Being big is not strength," he said quietly. "Being adaptable is strength." The words settled deeply. The wrestler stepped closer, not to challenge, but to close the emotional distance that had existed earlier. "You didn't try to hurt me," he said. "No." "You could have." "Yes." There was no ego in the admission, only clarity. The giant extended his hand. For a brief second, the room held its breath again, not from tension this time, but from anticipation. Bruce took the hand. The grip was firm, equal, not a test of dominance, an agreement. The wrestler gave a short nod. "I laughed at you." Bruce's expression remained calm. "You laughed at what you didn't understand." The giant managed a faint smile. "I'd like to understand." Bruce released his hand. "Then train," he said simply. No dramatic speech, no long lecture, just the answer. Around them, the energy in the room had completely transformed. The earlier amusement had dissolved into something heavier, respect layered with realization. 5 seconds. That was all anyone would remember. 5 seconds from charge to impact. 5 seconds from laughter to silence. But what they would not see, what they could not measure, were the years behind those seconds. The thousands of hours refining timing, the relentless questioning of limitation, the refusal to rely on what felt comfortable. The wrestler stepped back into the circle of spectators, no longer the aggressor, no longer the skeptic, just a man reconsidering what strength truly meant. Bruce turned slightly, scanning the room one last time. "Mass can intimidate," he said quietly. "Speed can surprise, but awareness decides." No one laughed now. The silence in the gym was different than before. It wasn't uncertainty. It was understanding. And in that understanding, something shifted far beyond a single throw, because the world respects size. But it remembers mastery. If this story changed how you see strength, comment, discipline beats size. And if you believe mastery is built in silence long before the moment of impact, subscribe, because legends aren't remembered for how loud they were. They're remembered for the 5 seconds that changed everything.